This morning I want to talk about receiving from God through a lesson from Elijah. Elijah and Elisha are my favourite ones, and maybe you can get up the back there, David, 1 Kings 17, chapter 17. I'm going to read the whole chapter, so if you haven't brought your Bible, you might be getting sick of my voice, but you may be able to read it, which will be good. But I want to bring some principles out here today. I teach a lot on receiving from God in different ways, and I think there's some good principles in here that we can learn if you grab a pen and a notepad. I believe God's going to speak to your heart this morning and give you a word that will actually be able to help apply to your situation or a situation that may come. 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. It says, "Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, 'As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word.' When the word of the Lord came to Elijah, he said, 'Leave here and turn eastward and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook. I have ordered the ravens to feed you there.' So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening. And he drank from the brook. Sometimes later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, 'Go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you with food.' So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and asked, 'Would you bring me a little water in a jar so that I may have a drink?' As she was going to get it, he called, 'And bring me, please, a piece of bread.' 'As surely as the Lord your God lives,' she replied, 'I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take it home, make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die.' Elisha said to her, 'Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said.'" How would you like to say it? "Don't be afraid, go home and die." That'd be pretty tough, eh? "Now go home and do what you've said about making this stuff, but first make a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me." Imagine if the current affair got a hold of that one. Think about it. Hey, sucking it out of the widow, the last little bit, and this man of God coming along and blah, 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 blah. "And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, the jar of flour will not be used up and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land." And she went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the women and for her family. For the jar of flour was not used up and a jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord had spoken by Elijah. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the home became ill. He grew worse and worse, and finally he stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" "Give me your son," Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him upstairs to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought tragedy upon this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. And Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house, and he gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." It took her a little time. So here we see a story of faith. It's a story of obedience and a story of provision. And it's displayed through showing the faithfulness and the compassion of God. The story shows that, God fits the right person for the right job. What he has for you, if he calls you, is the right job for you. And he's calling Elijah here. We don't hear much about it. We see that Elijah is a very colourful sort of figure. He's one of my favourites along with Elijah in the entire Bible. And there's not much said about him, that he suddenly appeared on the scene in this chapter 17. And without any huge introduction, and there's not a lot said about his life in the previous. So we don't know a lot about this guy. And he comes on the scene in Israel's most troubled time, because Ahab was now the king. And his father Omri, before that, had a treaty with Sidon. And Sidon, when they had the treaty with her, they had the god Baal. And he married Jezebel. And so we see in 1 Kings 16:30, it says that Ahab did evil above everyone else that were before him. So he must have been a pretty evil sort of king. And when these two married, they got together and they made Baal a major god of Israel. And they attempted to suppress the worship of the Israelites to the one true God. Babies were being sacrificed to Baal. And under the reign, it became illegal to worship God in Israel due to the influence of Jezebel. So it was a pretty hard time. And right in the middle of that darkness, God brings this man named Elijah out of nowhere. We don't know anything about him previous, only a little bit of where he came from. And here Elijah seemingly comes from nowhere and rebukes the king, Ahab. And he says that there will be no rain or no dew unless my word is spoken. And back in Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 17, it says that one of the great judgments that God would bring upon his people was that there would be a drought by his word. God fulfilled this because of what was happening in Israel and through the king. So Elijah's delivering this word to Ahab. Then the word of the Lord comes upon him and gives him direction after it. And he tells him to go east to hide in the book of Cherith. Now you need to understand that the word in Hebrew for Cherith means a cutting. It literally means a separation. So God's asking him to separate himself from everyone and go and hide in this place. And Elijah went to Cherith, and while he was there, he drank the water he was able to drink, and he was fed by ravens. Now you need to understand, ravens were not known as good parents to their young and letting them starve and not bring them food, but even the ravens, obeyed God's command and fed him. And ravens normally fed on dead carcasses. So I don't know what sort of meat he got. We don't know that, but how would you be? God, you give me some water, but I got this stinking, smelly meat. It's from a dead carcass. I had everything before I was in the house, and now I do this one thing for you, and now I'm living in this ravine by myself and eating horrible food and drinking water. It's worse than jail, and I'm serving you. Could you imagine if he had that sort of attitude? But the good thing about ravens is they normally hang around and circle around dead bodies and live around that area. Well, Elijah wasn't dead, so his hiding place would have been pretty good too. See, Elisha might not have had the best place to stay, but it met his needs. And do you know what? Your situation, what you're in now, may not be the best, but it's meeting your need. Your marriage may not be the best, but it's meeting your need. Your situation as your job or whatever may not be the best, but your needs are being met. And what happens is that something happens to Elijah that happens to us sometimes, is that suddenly, without warning, our brook dries up. And then what do we do? What do we do when these situations come upon us out of the blue, or these problems come and everything's going along okay? It's not the best, but it's okay. And next minute it gets worse. Well, I believe God will speak to us. God will give us a word if we listen. He will give us direction if we listen to him. But we must obey it no matter how ridiculous it sounds. Even when sometimes it just seems strange. Who's had one of those words? Then you go down there and think, hey, that's right. You need to go with guidance. But you need to also go with guidance from elders and people around you that can give you some good advice. You know, don't make major decisions unless you get some good spiritual counsel around you. See, God didn't give Elijah the total plan. He just said, go there. He didn't say what was going to happen after. And that's our walk with God. Our walk is that we trust him moment by moment, step by step. And he shows and he opens up and reveals things as we go. And then, you know the old way, you're up there and you look back and go, oh, I can see this all falling in place now. See, he's bigger than us. We've got to live for the now and go with him whatever he says.